It started with a storm, one of the worst the town had seen in years. The rain fell in sheets, thunder rattled the earth, and the winds howled like tortured souls. The house on Elmwood Lane, an aging Victorian relic, stood in defiance against the elements. Its most striking feature was a massive, ornately framed window in the living room that stretched nearly from floor to ceiling. The locals called it the Weeping Window. The Parker family had moved in just a week earlier. Margaret Parker, a history professor, her husband David, and their 12-year-old daughter Emily were excited to escape the chaos of the city.
Subscribe.
The house was old but charming, and Margaret saw it as a chance to reconnect with her family and spend quiet evenings away from distractions. But on their very first night, something odd happened. Emily, while exploring the living room, noticed faint streaks on the large window. They looked like tear stains, as if someone had pressed their face against the glass and sobbed. She called for her parents, who dismissed it as condensation. David wiped the streaks away, and the family laughed it off. By the third night, the laughter had stopped. Margaret woke up to the sound of faint tapping. It was subtle, like fingernails rapping against glass. She nudged David awake, but he grumbled something incoherent and rolled over. Reluctantly, she got out of bed and made her way to the living room. The window stood tall and foreboding in the darkness, and for a moment she thought the tapping had been her imagination. But as she approached, the streaks had returned, more prominent this time. They weren't random smudges. They formed patterns, almost like handprints dragged down the glass. Her breath caught as a flash of lightning illuminated the backyard. For just a second, she thought she saw a shadow dart beneath the oak tree. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stepped closer to the window, but there was nothing outside except the swaying branches. Margaret chalked it up to exhaustion and returned to bed. The next morning, Emily was unusually quiet at breakfast. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Margaret asked. Emily hesitated before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. "I heard someone crying last night downstairs." Margaret froze. "What do you mean?" "It sounded like a woman," Emily continued. "I thought it was you, but when I came to check, no one was there, just the window." David dismissed their concerns, claiming the storm was playing tricks on their senses. But as the days went by, things only got stranger. Every night the streaks reappeared on the glass, no matter how many times they were cleaned. The sounds of crying grew louder, and Emily began waking up with nightmares she couldn't explain. On the sixth night, Margaret decided to do some research. She dug through town records and eventually found an article about the house, dated 1923. Her blood ran cold as she read the headline, "Family Tragedy Shocks Community. Mother and 2 children dead in apparent murder-suicide." The article detailed how a woman named Eleanor Whitaker had lived in the house with her 2 young children. After her husband abandoned them, Eleanor grew increasingly unstable. One stormy night, she drowned her children in the backyard before taking her own life in front of the living room window. Neighbors reported hearing her cries echoing through the storm, but no one arrived in time to stop her. Margaret felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the streaks on the glass weren't random. They were handprints, smeared as if Eleanor had pressed her hands against the window in despair. That night, Margaret confronted the window. She stood in the darkened living room, staring at its reflection in the glass. "If you're here," she whispered, "what do you want from us?" The room grew icy cold. Suddenly, the streaks appeared on the glass again, this time forming words. "Help them!" Margaret's knees buckled. She screamed for David, who came running. When he saw the words, his face went pale. The couple decided to leave the house immediately. They grabbed Emily, packed what they could, and fled to a nearby motel. But as they drove away, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. When she glanced in the rearview mirror, she saw a woman's face in the window, her eyes brimming with tears. The Parkers never returned to the house, and it remains abandoned to this day. Locals claim that on stormy nights, you can still hear Eleanor's cries and see her handprints on the glass, forever marking the spot where tragedy unfolded.